All right, it is 9:02. Still a few people filtering in, but John, should we kick it off?
Yeah, let's go ahead. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Hoffman. I'm DIR's Chief Technology Officer and Deputy State CIO. Today, we've got an exciting event scheduled here to walk through what's coming forward in 2024. We're talking about all the different reporting and legislative initiatives and things that are kind of we're going to embrace in 2024 and hopefully tie it all together. So many times we all do this as individual efforts, and hopefully this event gives you a chance to understand how they all tie together. We're going to go through modernization as a program, some of the reporting overviews, the state strategic plan, different IRDR components, spectrum, and talk about legislative appropriation request. So just right off the bat, as I mentioned, so many times we look at this cycle that we go through, and we think about individual projects and the efforts that we need to go through, the different reports and such. And one of the things that we've been talking about internally at DIR, and I thought I would share, is really taking modernization as a program. The acronym of MAP. Right, we've got so many different software as a service and everything else. Well, let's put MAP out there. But this is really a basis where if you think about it as not as individual initiatives trying to go through every other year of a walkthrough, but you look at it as a understanding of your portfolio of systems, applications, and processes. Taking documentation from there, aligning it with all your different workforce initiatives and how you're continuing to upskill and train and build the different programs so that they're able to support and envision and innovate around the different portfolios. And then going into a multiple biennium budget plan, it then kind of solidifies a roadmap for the agency. I know we all went through that modernization report initiative not too long ago. And so this could be kind of a carry forward on a lot of the things that were brought out in that modernization report, and then become something to do as a cross-check within your organization and say, okay, well, here's where we are. Here's the initiatives we're doing internally. And then this is where we received appropriation and moving forward and going through that cycle and re-reviewing every couple of years. Gives a bigger perspective, if you will, versus just saying, okay, well, we need this particular project for this solution. And so this is something that we're looking at internally as well, and thought it's a great program to really look at how you're modernizing. And so then when you think about all the different things that we've got ahead of us between now and next December, this effort really kind of shows how it all fits together, right? And so we do have the different legislations. It goes into a lot of the different components that you think about with a strategic plan. We're going to go through that and the different goals, objectives we got there. Getting into the IRDR and the agency strategic plan efforts. And finally, then some of the more specific requests around appropriations and PCLS report. And then finally, how we culminate all that as the biennial performance report. Next slide. And that's a whole lot, right? People, I think, take a look at that and it can become a bit overwhelming and trying to understand, well, okay, I'm beginning to get a sense of you're going to tie all of this together. What does it mean from a time frame standpoint? And so the big gold star says, well, this is where we are. And when you think about where we're going forward in the even years, this is really the opportunity for the different agencies to gather all of their different requirements and information necessary to meet their objectives, business or statutory. Putting all of that information in on the information resources deployment review, further moving it into where the different agency information goes and the agency reports. Spectrum is a tool that we'll be talking about and how that is a foundation for other reporting and documentation. And then it gets to finally to a point where you look at your LARs, which ones you're actually going to submit, and how we work together with the PCLS. As that goes in, behind the scenes, DIR is using a lot of that information for the BPR that will also go to the legislation and staff, legislators and staff. And that then kicks off the odd number of years each time. And so I hope this wheel is something that you all can reference and begin understanding, well, what does that mean for us and our resources? How will we be able to support all these different components? Jennifer, you want to talk a little bit further about putting the puzzle together?
Yeah, so as John has talked about, we're really trying to help y'all understand how all of these components work together, and how if you can kind of build your program out and how all these tick and tie. And so today, you know, you see the wheel and you've seen how all of these, the time frames, but also wanting to show you in a different way of looking at it, kind of how we're bucketing all of these different types of initiatives that you are completing for your agency. And so today we're going to walk through all of these items kind of with this lens on it, where we're talking about the state strategic plan. That's guidance to you. But then when you're doing the completion of IRDR and your spectrum assessment, that's really you're providing that content, you're getting ready and that where you are. And then as you start going to reporting, you're reporting out different items that are getting you ready for those financial requests with that LAR. And then, as John mentioned, going in and what the outcome is that we report to the legislature through that biennial performance report. So today we're going to deep dive, not deep dive, but kind of highlight all of these components. And then along the way, if you have questions, we're answering questions as well. But I'll turn it over to Tessa Lopez to start with the state strategic plan.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. My name is Tessa Lopez, and I'm a policy analyst here with DIR. So it all starts with the state strategic plan, which is really the beacon of this entire process. DIR is required to produce this plan every odd year. And really, the plan is a high-level forward-looking plan that sets the strategic direction, and it establishes the technology goals for the state for a period of 5 years. It's also really a framework that can support agencies' technology modernization plans, and it also lays the groundwork for the state's biennial technology planning, funding, and reporting cycle. Collaboration is really at the heart of developing this plan throughout the entire planning process, which is really a months-long effort. DIR collaborates with an appointed advisory committee and other stakeholders to determine those statewide technology goals and objectives that we address in the plan. The most recent plan was just published this past month, and included in the plan is an aspirational vision for how agencies can use technology to transform the Texas government experience. It also includes 3 guiding principles that agencies can consider as they plan and implement their technology projects. And it also has the 4 goals, which are supported by 15 objectives. In just a second here, we'll post a link to the new plan. We'll also have a link available for a reference guide, which is basically just a consolidation, a summarization of the plan. In case you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, we have that available for you. With that said, I will go ahead and turn it over to Elizabeth Cooper, who will tell us a little bit more about the IRDR.
Hi, y'all. I'm Elizabeth Cooper. I'm the Director of Planning, Policy, and Reporting. And part of that reporting is the Information Resources Deployment Review. This is really your opportunity to assess where you are on many levels. This is a standardized survey. It includes several parts, an IT inventory, and an assessment of your IT environment that covers everything from security to accessibility to modernization, how you're using advanced technologies. So it covers the whole gamut. It also asks you about compliance and primarily the compliance with information resources statutes and rules. And it asks you to look at how your goals align with that state strategic plan. When we also ask you to complete an inventory, we think about the sources of those inventories. You're going to complete information about all your business applications and all your devices and other IT assets. And we really try to think about what you have done in the past. And so we pre-populate a lot of that information. We will use sources from previous IRDRs, previous assessments of your applications. And also, if you're using shared technology services and complete an inventory there, we import that from the shared technology services portal. We use these results for a lot of things, but they're also results that you can use. So there are things that you can look at from a compliance standpoint where you might need to take some corrective action when you complete your inventory. And Jennifer will talk about this a little bit more. You need to think about what applications might be part of your prioritization of cybersecurity and legacy systems, where you would end up requesting funding in your LAR. So when you're completing the IRDR, you think about what applications might need a new current assessment. And so it's really your opportunity to kind of look at your environment and assess where you are today. Now, DIR does use these results. We use them to create the biennial performance report. We aggregate all of this information. Tessa's going to tell you a little bit more about that report. We also do an assessment on a statewide level of IT infrastructure, and it helps us provide answers to questions that the legislature may have. Next slide, please. So completing this assessment, your IRDR timeline, it's coming right up. One of the things we do is we give you a preview of the instructions, and we'll post those on the chat in just a minute. They haven't been posted to our website yet, but they will be before the end of this month. This gives you an opportunity to distribute those instructions to different roles that may need to be involved in compiling the answers for the information resources deployment review. In January, the portal Spectrum actually opens, and this is where the data entry occurs. This is where your inventory resides that you will review and update. And that will occur in mid-January. And then all of this is due in March 31st, 2024. Now, a word about higher education. Higher education really has to focus on the accessibility components. There's a statute that requires higher ed to complete an accessibility survey, and that's part of the IRDR. And we have that clearly labeled throughout the IRDR instructions. And then after the IRDR closes, if there are areas of compliance with some of these information resources, statutes, or rules that you say, yeah, we're not really in compliance, you have the opportunity to develop a plan that says, okay, here's how we're going to come into compliance in the future. And those plans, just the plan itself, is due May 31st. You may have plans to implement some of that corrective action further out into the future. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to tell you a little more about the application assessments. Jennifer?
Thanks, Elizabeth. So as Elizabeth mentioned, you do have the option to generate these application portfolio management assessments. through the Spectrum tool. And it is optional, but if you do plan to submit the applications through the PCLS process, because that PCLS process that we'll talk about in more detail helps you potentially get funding to modernize those applications. You are required to complete this assessment if you want to submit through PCLS. So we encourage agencies to do this and make sure they have it, and so it doesn't sneak up on you when you're submitting for PCLS and realize that you haven't done your assessment. Some agencies, you might already have an assessment done for your application, and that's good. Because you have to, if you're going to submit through PCLS, it has to be a current assessment or within the last 4 years. If you're a DCS customer, we do include all of your CMDB data in the Spectrum assessment. And so we know this is a lot of work, but it really does help provide a picture of towards where that application is from a maturity standpoint. Now, moving on to talk a little bit more in detail about PCLS. John, I'm going to turn it to you.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. So PCLS, many years ago, as agencies submitted their appropriations request, different staff, LBB would come and say, DIR, what's perspective around this particular technology or different things, and we don't really have a lot of visibility to the appropriation side. And certainly DIR is always very cautious to represent any particular agency's initiative or appropriation. And so they came up with the methodology around PCLS for agencies to submit to DIR their information. And we created with a framework that enables a broader picture, perhaps, if you will, for the different reviews to look at and understand not only what the project is, but different components. And so there's several different fields that the PCLS has. One is just the general information of the project itself, but then it does tie to specific business processes and applications. And this is, again, carrying forward that Spectrum inventory side. For cybersecurity projects, it really gets into a description of the different cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities and controls. It kind of provides a consistent template for different reviewers to understand what different projects may have as concerns in those different threats. And on the legacy side, if it's a legacy project, it really gets into which items are being updated, refreshed, what's the business value of those systems, perhaps a return on investment that you see through either like the efficiencies and vulnerability or reduction of financial vulnerabilities and things. And then the final piece gets into the determinations. What is the probability of these different systems being impacted going forward? And what would that impact be? And so the report itself takes all of that information. Again, it complements an appropriation request. In fact, we work with LBB, and for a PCLS to be submitted, there has to be an associated PCLS number that goes through the LBB with the LAR process. And it gives us then the ability to have a conduit, if you will, for each of the different agencies and their projects with a more substantial insight. DIR does take a look at the overall responses, and here's a good calendar of all the different pieces and parts. We look at first in May, we're going to do kind of the first introductions of the instructions posted. We'll have a webinar there in June. And this is the time frame that most agencies are putting their appropriation requests together. Then we're going to be getting into the Spectrum there in June. And finally, the deadline for PCLS aligns with whatever your appropriation deadline is. Whatever your LAR submission date is we do PCLS there coinciding with that. So that if there's any changes, we certainly are keeping it current with anything that's going on with the LAR. We do take all of the information and put together a report that we send that summarizes the overall request, takes a look and understands, well, what are, perhaps in the risk and the impact side, how those are quantified in some way to be able to show what that scaling is. And we do deliver that report, which is extraordinarily confidential. We go through quite a rigorous process to make sure that that report is sent only to specific individuals with the need to know. Certainly, we understand the security risk and consideration of having a report of what is the state's threats. And so we take very seriously around how that report is distributed and identified and markered throughout the process. We do then send a summary of the report to each of the different submitting agencies, just so that only calls out their particular submission. But there then is an awareness of, well, where is your project against the overall report and the volume and the numbers, and we make sure that you all are understanding kind of what the LBB and the legislative staff are seeing. Jody, you want to take the LAR?
Yep, sure. Love to. Let's talk about money. So now you've done all of this assessing and reporting, and it's time to start integrating this information into your legislative appropriation request. Most of you have probably had the pleasure of doing that in a previous biennium. And if you haven't, we're here to help guide you through that process to make sure you get the money, or at least have requested the money that you need to address any of your needs. So the new biennium 26-27, hard to believe we're already there. You will be reporting on what you've spent in the current biennium 24-25, as well as asking for your 26-27 funding requests. There are three components, primary components that relate to what we're talking about here today. If you're an STS customer and you're purchasing shared technology services, you'll most likely have a DCS capital budget if your spend is over 100K for the biennium. You'll also have a baseline or base level request outside of DCS and requests for consideration of exceptional item funding. So if you need incremental funding above your current spending levels, you'll be developing exceptional item requests. And these reports that we've been talking about and assessments will help support your request for any incremental funding needs. Next slide, please. So this is a breakout. It's a draft. It's the first draft we put together that if you are a shared technology services customer developing that DCS capital budget request, and if you're already consuming our services, no matter how small you are, we'll be working with our MSI to develop a forecast for you. And then we'll be putting out that forecast and going through a review internally with DIR, with our governance leadership, developing packages and sending those out to you in the late March, early April timeframe. Once you get those packages, we'll give you a little bit of time to review them. And then we'll be conducting our own webinars on how you communicate any changes to those forecasts back to us. And then we work with you over the entire summer, as John indicated, to make sure that we're tying any project work that you're going to do through STS to your PCLS submission, anything that you're asking for exceptional item funding, any of those planning needs you have for the next biennium. We're making sure that we get them into your LAR and our packages because we want to be saying the same thing. We want to be telling the LBB and the legislature, this is how much money you need, and we'd like that information to be identical. Then by late August, you're submitting your legislative appropriation request, and we have a reporting requirement to tell the LBB. So we take all of that information for shared technology services. We write what we call a one-pager narrative. Usually it's 2 or 3 pages, and we tell them in words what's in those funding requests. We work with your agencies to make sure you like the way we're saying it. And then that helps the LBB as they start going through legislative hearings, give them the information they need to support your request. And then hopefully throughout session, we're able to support you as needed to secure all of that funding. And I think that goes back to John or Elizabeth.
This is me, actually.
Oh,
Thanks,
sorry.
Jody.
Thank you.
So rounding out the process here is the biennial performance report. DIR is required to produce the report every even year in November, right before the legislative session begins. And basically, in a nutshell, the BPR is a progress report. It is an assessment of the progress agencies are making toward the technology goals that we define in the state strategic plan. Those two reports are very closely tied together, the state strategic plan and the biennial performance report. Elizabeth mentioned this a little bit earlier when speaking about the IRDR, but the way that we measure progress, the state's progress toward those goals is through the IRDR. The data that we collect from the IRDR is used in the BPR to really demonstrate at a high level how the state is aligning with the goals that are defined in the state strategic plan. Now, in addition to demonstrating the progress we've made, we also in the report highlight agencies that have implemented projects or initiatives that are aligning with those technology goals. And we also use the BPR as a mechanism to propose legislative recommendations to the legislature. I believe I will be turning it over to Jennifer, who will give us a recap.
Thanks, Tessa. So as we're just recapping everything we've already told you. So this chart just kind of goes through all the different components that we've talked about today and kind of shows where you're responsible and then where DIR, what they do in the different, for the different areas, and then the dates. And so I'll be thinking, as we're recapping here in the next 5 minutes, be thinking about if you have questions for us today, we'll open it up for questions. Would be happy so be thinking about those. But also be thinking about as we move on to what you need to be doing for next steps. So Elizabeth mentioned those IRDR instructions will be sent at the end of this month. Spectrum will launch in January to start getting that information in. Putting together your teams that are responsible for providing input and drafting these responses, and really thinking about, as John mentioned, that modernization as a program and how you can bundle all of these and go, you know what, we're thinking about this from a different lens this time, and how do we make this a programmatic type function? Also thinking about long-term, beyond the IRDR. So we know that all of these reports require a lot of effort from different staff and different divisions within your agency. And then the LAR piece comes from your financial teams. But if you're thinking long-term and beyond just the IRDR components, do you have those applications that should be considered in PCLS? Obviously, that will drive funding. Potential funding. We've seen a lot of success for agencies that leverage the PCLS route. And then identifying what your legacy systems are in the inventory, really making sure that you have awareness of what's in your portfolio. So kind of coming back to that map, the funding portion, the portfolio, and then where your workforce is in that. So before we have plenty of time. We wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for questions. We also have some email addresses right here. You're more than welcome to send questions to these IRDR@dir.texas.gov or the PCLS email. But open it up to questions, and I'd ask Mark if you don't mind telling us potentially if there's any questions already in there that we can answer.
Sure, I can. Thank you, Jennifer. I can recap what has been asked so far. There was a couple of questions about slides, about the recording. We plan to make the recording of this webinar available on DIR's YouTube channel. And then we we will share slides with attendees following the webinar. There was also a question about instructions for the IRDR. Those will be published later this month, and the IRDR itself will open in Spectrum about mid-January. And we put a couple links in the chat and then in the question pane. I think that covers everything that has been asked so far, John.
I wanted to add real quick on the IRDR, we will be here to help you. We will have a specific webinar in February that really gets into the details that will give you time to have looked at the questions, log into the Spectrum portal and be prepared to use that time in the webinar to, ask your real specific questions about the IRDR. And then also, as we get into March, and y'all are working toward that March 31st deadline, we'll have some office hours. And you can feel free to email that IRDR email address, and we'll get back to you immediately.
And that's a great point, Elizabeth, to mention that this webinar today is not replacing any of the instructions and details webinars. So they'll have the IRDR, there'll be a PCLS webinar. Jody will be having a lot of LAR webinars and instructions. So today was just more of a get ready. It's the cycle is starting and it's coming. So in trying to show everything, how it all ties together. So you'll definitely be seeing your normal webinars that you're accustomed to with those instructions and details in those.
Okay, we did have a few more questions come in. IRDR regarding higher ed. One slide said the deadline was in March, but another slide said exempt from reporting. Can you guys clarify a little bit IRDR and higher ed?
Sure. So all higher ed institutions of higher ed are required to conduct an IRDR, but you're not required to report all of it to DIR. What institutions of higher education are required to report is the accessibility survey. It's a digital accessibility survey. It's embedded in the IRDR questions. We provide real specific instructions that say, hey, higher ed, these are questions that you need to answer. And then the questions that you're not required to report to us by law, we put a little call out box that says, higher ed, you don't need to worry about these questions. Now, of course, if you want to use Spectrum as a way to manage your inventory, a way to do that assessment, higher education certainly is welcome to do so, but you're not required to answer all the questions in Spectrum. Hopefully that answered your question.
Then we had a question that said, regarding services like the security training that DIR currently funds, how does an agency know if we need to secure funding or if DIR is looking to secure funding for the next biennium?
Yeah, I can take that, Mark. So, so different security services, it varies. The security training, we've got different training that's available for the agency training that's free. There may be different assessments and different components around some of the multi-factor authentications and levels and things like that. If I would reach out directly to the Office of the Chief Information Security Office. Usually Susie Hilliard is a great contact for those different services, and you can coordinate with them. A lot of times, if there is limited funding, we will have a list of kind of ongoing who is queued and trying to make sure that they're aware of where they are in that timing.
Great. And if someone wanted to reach out in person once the process gets rolling, do you have a team that we can contact directly outside of webinars for assistance?
Yeah, so I think,
Yes.
I mean, so these email addresses right here go to those teams, and so absolutely you can reach out to any one of these email addresses. And this is all DIR staff that is answering that are monitoring these boxes. And so if your question is related to something that's more targeted, maybe towards LAR, we can get you in contact with the right person at DIR.
Or the LBB.
Or
Right,
the,
because a lot of the,
Yeah.
and you know, we certainly work closely with LBB in these reports and different things. And they have great insight to different appropriations in that process that they're doing.
Right, I to see some comments about the webinar, a suggestion about exempt being it said thanks. So maybe the exempt message should be updated to something more informational, such as limited responses required. Thanks for the clarification in regards to higher ed and the IRDR, I think.
yeah, we can absolutely, before we send these slides out, we'll if to make the message more clear to what Elizabeth stated, we can look at that table for sure. Thank you for raising that.
Well, certainly these are emails for contacts. They'll get to a pretty broad distribution. We hope that this provided some insight to the bigger picture. As Jennifer said, you know, this is just a first glance at what 2024 is going to look like. Each one of these will have more in-depth reviews and instructions, follow-up webinars, and we just hope to open the door for communication, give perspective of our roles and where we were looking for collaboration with you all on the information. And we really hope that 2024 is a successful year for people looking at their modernization and their ongoing appropriation process. So with that, please keep in touch. If you have any questions, we are available, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.